on my list, so I'm going to look for the honourable member for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yeah, I know myself and the honourable member for Medicine Hat, Carts and Warner, you know, we're similar in appearances, but I do have a better haircut, Mr. Speaker.
That's debatable.
Look, Mr. Speaker, I'm actually disappointed to be speaking to this travesty of justice and human rights committed by our current Minister of Public Safety. I'm disappointed, Mr. Speaker, but to be honest, I'm not surprised. This minister has a track record of mishandling files that ultimately is a disservice to justice in this country and to victims. And this is why we're debating the amendment today that the Conservative Party has put forward, ultimately recommending that the minister resign. So just so it's clear and it's on the record once again, Mr. Speaker, our motion includes the following: that the 7th report of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, presented on Monday, April 17, 2023, be not now concurred in, but that it be recommitted to the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights with the instructions that it amend the same so as to recommend that the Minister of Public Safety immediately resign, given his total lack of considerations for victims of crime and his mishandling of the transfer to more cozy arrangements of one of the worst serial killers in Canadian history, that this unacceptable move has shocked the public and created new trauma for the families of the victims, and that the Minister of Public Safety's office knew about this for 3 months prior to Paul Bernardo's transfer, and instead of holding it, the information was hidden from the families. So obviously I've made some very provocative statements even in my opening couple sentences, Mr. Speaker, but I want to lay the groundwork for why I believe this. So let's go back to this minister's track record, back to August of 2021, when he was the Minister of Immigration. What happened then, Mr. Speaker? We had the fall of Kabul. We had the fall of Afghanistan. And instead of us dealing with that and the government dealing with that situation, i.e. with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Immigration, the Minister of National Defense, primarily focused on helping, in reality, victims, Afghans that helped Canada and get them to safety. What did they do? They called an election, Mr. Speaker. Unacceptable. This minister here, you know, he was in that seat. He could have had a process in place, much like we've done in previous years under this current government and under previous governments, that when we have a situation around the globe where Canada can make a difference in allowing refugees and people at risk to get to Canada, that we could do this. And this is so fundamentally important. Unfortunately, it's something this government still isn't putting the adequate priority and focus on. They're allowing bureaucracy and staff to interfere with getting the job done. So that's just one thing. That's this minister's background right off the get-go. Well, he's now been the Minister of Public Safety since that last election. What did we see just in the last year alone on the Bill C-21? And again, a minister that's not focused on victims and justice, but is instead focused on law-abiding hunters, sport shooters, and farmers, despite him saying, no, that's not what this bill is about. Lo and behold, there was a last-minute amendment put forth by the minister that exactly targeted thousands and thousands and thousands of hunters, sport shooters, and farmers across this country. And it wasn't focused on actually addressing the root causes that cause justice issues, that allow criminals, mass murderers, rapists, gangs, drug trafficking, etc. It was focused again on the wrong demographic. Anyway, I was just using that, Mr. Speaker, to sort of set the stage. We're now dealing with an amendment because we've now have evidence that this minister and his office were aware 3 months prior to the general public becoming aware that Paul Bernardo, one of our most horrific serial killers and rapists, was being transferred out of a maximum security prison into a medium security prison. So I want to set the stage because I mean, we're all sort of victims of our life experiences. But we live in a Westminster system of government that's primarily focused, that allows our democracy to work on a day-to-day basis. It's all about ministerial accountability, and the buck stops with them. So my comments about, life experiences. As many of the members know, I come from a military background. The whole thing around the military, and again, there's a misperception out there that it's all about following orders. Not at all. That's not the way the military functions. In fact, it's a very ground up, from the lowest levels all the way to the highest levels, of forming a plan and enabling the decision makers to make the best decision possible. But when I served at the higher levels, whether it's a chief of staff, as a director, when we're planning stuff, when we're doing things, what's the one common theme? Doesn't matter if I was in operations overseas or here at our Canadian Joint Operations Command, there's daily briefs where the staff's primary role is to flag those issues of concern directly to those decision makers, the commanders, the people that are ultimately responsible for making decisions and providing guidance and direction. It's not being blocked by the gatekeepers or the staff. It's the person in charge. And that's the key thing around the way our whole democracy works. And look, let's not just take my words from here. This was a CBC report that basically broke this news. And I'm going to read a little bit from a CBC article that just was released. Yeah, shame, yeah. Quote, the demand for the Minister of Public Safety exit was prompted by a CBC report that staff in the Minister's office was aware of Paul Bernardo's pending transfer as far back as March the 2nd. Subsequent reporting confirmed that the Prime Minister's office was also made aware in March, and that the Prime Minister himself was then briefed on the transfer on May 29th. Now, in addition, according to these versions of events, the Minister's staff obviously didn't think it was necessary to tell him that the transfer of one of Canada's most notorious murderers until May 30th, a day after that the move was made, and even a day after that the Prime Minister himself was briefed. That the fact that the staff neglected to alert the Minister about this impending transfer is puzzling in itself, and is obviously an apparent failure in keeping the Minister informed. But it's even kind of more interesting when the Minister himself described this as a shocking event. And how is he so shocked when this is something his staff should have informed him, 3 months, prior? Now, the Minister has talked about the fact that he can't, initially was, well, this is all about Correction Services Canada. Now there's some admittance that, well, how the information flowed in, he wasn't briefed, but he couldn't really do anything about it. But lo and behold, what's he done now? The Minister's actually come forth and done something that he should have done immediately, which was issue a new directive that stipulates that he must be informed. Well, that's just common practice. And so my issue comes back to, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister needs to surround himself with competent staff and people that understand what's truly an important issue that is his responsibility, because that's how we protect our justice system, how we protect victims in this country. So I'll conclude, Mr. Speaker, because I know I'm running out of time, that ultimately the Minister needs to do the honorable thing. He must resign, because that's really the only option left. And if he won't resign, the Prime Minister should fire him. The additional thing that the government should be doing is immediately implementing the private member's bill or motion that was put forward by the member from Niagara Falls, Conservative member, which actually puts into legislation that demands, in layman's term, to paraphrase, our most notorious murderers and criminals behind, when they are found guilty, that they must remain in a maximum security prison. I'll leave my comments at that, Mr. Speaker.